most famous giant, that being Goliath. Well, in order to understand this idea of giants, we have to go back even further and look at the fact that all over the world, and especially in the Greek world, when man came upon what we know today to be known as fossils and saw giant bones, they didn't necessarily think that those bones came from animals. For the most part, when you would find a fossilized bone, then that bone generally was individualized. It was not a complete skeletal system of an animal. And so out of that thought process, man began to believe that giants once roamed the earth. And this happened all over the world. So all over the world, people started telling stories about giants that roamed the earth prior to man's existence. And stories like Cyclops and other giants, ogres, and things of that nature began to be created into the mind of men through fan fiction, believing that these were based on the fact that these bones were found. And as these stories continue to proliferate, people continue to make up stories and tell even more detailed stories about how giants ruled their country. Or in the book of Enoch, it talks about how the giant Og, who could not fit on the ark, was strapped to the top of the ark and therefore survived. And that is why giants still existed during the time frame of David.
And that is exactly why I tell people, stay away from those non-canonical Bibles. Stay away from those non-canonical books. The book of Enoch, talking about Og strapped himself onto the ark and that's how he survived. Come on now, people. If God said that you're not making it out if you ain't on this ark, what do you think he meant? So clearly, they're calling God a liar in the book of Enoch. But they're not just also that. You see Og in Deuteronomy. You see him in Deuteronomy. You don't never see him in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. See this bro pop up and watch this. This is Deuteronomy 3:11. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. It is not in Rabbath of the children of Ammon. 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man. Clearly, dude was a giant. And as you can see, though, dude going to the book of Enoch, what are you talking about? If you're talking to a Christian, and especially me as a Christian, I don't care about the book of Enoch. That's not canonical. I'm not going off of that. Bro pops up in Deuteronomy. Dude don't pop up in Genesis. What are you talking about? Okay, he mentioned how people today who have, tall height have that little dysfunction that they deal with. The reason why is because, remember, in the previous video, I said the oxygen level back then was way better because sin didn't just, boom, just come into the world like that. So Adam was still a little bit in his perfect state. He was still tall. He was still strong. Everything of that sort, intellect, everything was still there. Nothing about him was affected yet. As far as, spiritually and, sin being in the world and everything of that sort, communion with the Father. Point I'm getting at is, when you get later and later and later down the line, that's when you start seeing disfigurement and everything of that sort going on because sin is starting to hit. It's starting to click now. At first, it wasn't really settling in, but as the line and the generation started to get down in there, you start to see the effects of sin more. So guess what? It says right here, yes, oxygen significantly affects bone structure. As a lack of oxygen, hypoxia, if I'm saying it correctly, can impair bone formation by inhibiting osteoblast, if I'm saying that correctly, activity and promoting, osteoclast activity, leading to reduced bone density and potential bone weakening. So as we can see, people, if you're not getting the proper oxygen, enough oxygen, but not just also that, pure oxygen, because in the city, our oxygen is terrible. So much pollution and waste is being dumped around that you're not getting pure oxygen. You're not getting the best of what God gave us, which is that being able to breathe that in and breathe it out because of the pollution and everything that is going on. That wasn't like how it was during Adam's time or even a little bit after that. But like I said, once you got down the line and in generations, you start to see the corruption and the effects of sin more than what you did when you saw with Adam. So people back then obviously can get that tall, 15 feet, 20 feet. And you saw that.
Another article from the New York Times, written in 1897, reads, "One of the 3 recently discovered mounds in this town has been opened. In it was found the skeleton of a man of gigantic size. The bones measured from head to foot over 9 feet and were in a fair state of preservation. The skull was as large as a half-bushel measure. Some finely tempered rods of copper and other relics were lying near the bones. The mound from which these relics were taken is 10 feet high and 30 feet long, and varies from 6 to 8 feet in width. The 2 mounds of lesser size will be excavated soon." This article from the St. Paul Globe, written in 1904, states, "Bones of a human skeleton 11 feet high are dug up in Nevada. Workmen engaged in digging gravel here today uncovered at a depth of about 12 feet a lot of bones, part of the skeleton of a gigantic human being. Dr. Samuels examined them and pronounced them to be the bones of a man who must have been nearly 11 feet in height." Apparently, these discoveries were something completely normal back in the day, and they weren't hidden from the public as they are today. The discoveries of giant skeletons weren't limited just to North America. This article talks of a giant's skeletons found in a cave in Mexico. The article reads, "Charles C. Klepp, who has recently returned from Mexico, where he has been in charge of Thomas W. Lawson's mining interest, has called the attention of Professor Agassiz to a remarkable discovery made by him. He found in Mexico a cave containing some 200 skeletons of men, each above 8 feet in height. The cave was evidently the burial place of a race of giants who antedated the Aztecs. Mr. Clapp arranged the bones of one of these skeletons and found the total length to be 8 feet 11 inches. Other articles mention discoveries of giants in Europe. This article from 1892, written by the London Globe, tells of the discovery of a race of giants in modern-day France. It reads, "In the year 1890, some human bones of enormous size, double the ordinary in fact, were found in the tumulus of Castelnau, and have since been carefully examined by Professor Kiener, who, while admitting that the bones are those of a very tall race, nevertheless finds them abnormal in dimensions and apparently of morbid growth. They undoubtedly reopen the question of the giants of antiquity, but do not furnish evidence to decide it." You have no idea how many more newspaper articles we found. There were discoveries of giants all across the globe, and today, scientists and archaeologists pretend this never even happened. This article, titled "When Giants Roamed Earth," talks about the historical discoveries of giants from the time of the Roman Empire to the 19th century. Here's what it reads. "The past was more prolific in the production of giants than the present. In 1830, one of these giants, who is exhibited at Rouen, was 10 feet high, and the giant Galabra, brought from Arabia to Rome in the time of Claudius Caesar, was the same height. Phantom, who lived in the time of Eugene II, was 11½ feet in height. The Chevalier Scrogg, in his journey to the Peak Tenerife, found in one of the caverns of that mountain the head of a giant who had 60 teeth and who was not less than 15 feet high. The giant Farragus, slain by Orlando, the nephew of Charlemagne, according to reports, was 28 feet high. In 1814, near Saint Gernat, was found the tomb of the giant Isolant, who was not less than 30 feet high. In 1590, near Rouen, was found a skeleton whose head held a bushel of corn, and which was 19 feet in height. The giant Bacchart was 22 feet high. In 1623, near the castle in Dauphine, a tomb was found 30 feet long, 16 feet wide, and 8 feet high, on which were cut in gray stone the words, Cantologus Rex. The skeleton was found entire and measured 25 1/4 feet high, 10 feet across the shoulders and 5 feet from breastbone to the back. But France is not the only country where giant skeletons have been unearthed. Near Palermo, Sicily, in 1516, was found the skeleton of a giant 30 feet high. Near Magrino, on the same island, in 1816, was found the skeleton of a giant of 30 feet, whose head was the size of a hog's head, and each tooth weighed 5 ounces. Although back in the days these discoveries were made public, once the discovered skeletons were brought to the respected museums and historical institutions, they completely disappeared and no one ever talked about them again. Here is a map of all reports of giants in North America. It's truly astonishing how many of them are there. Almost all of the discoveries end up in the Smithsonian Institute, and we all know how good they are at covering up major discoveries. There are